This is the SvBony SV510. It is a telescope designed specifically for solar observation. I bought this before the solar eclipse for $60. I expect that after the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse, there will be a lot of these on the used market. You can probably pick them up for less than 50 bucks. So let's open it up and see what you get for that price range. Now I want to say, you should never look at the sun, ever. You need to have proper filters in place before you look at the sun, otherwise it will burn out your eye. So don't try this with any other telescope. This telescope is designed specifically for looking at the sun. It has the filters built in. So it comes with a little backpack. It's, nothing special, but it's not a bad quality. It feels like a decent nylon here. There's foam padding with mesh on the straps. It's got a little hanging hook. You could potentially hang this backpack under the tripod if they have a hook on the tripod. So it's small, portable. You could carry it on a hike. It would also qualify definitely as carry-on luggage, maybe personal item, depending on how big the area under your seat is. So inside, we have an instruction booklet. There is an accessory pocket with some accessories inside of it. So it has a 20mm eyepiece. It has a diagonal. That's all the thing in the accessory pocket. And then it has, in the main body of the backpack, a folding tripod with its own little carry bag, and the main telescope itself packed in a little bit of bubble wrap. And underneath the tissue paper, we have this telescope. It feels lightweight, it feels cheap, but it is a dedicated solar observation telescope. It does have a dust cover, and integrated inside of it, so you know it's safe for solar use, is a solar film. Now the film has a couple of little wrinkles. I can see it's not stretched perfectly tight, but that is in there and it's pre-set up. Now there are some screw threads here. I'm not going to take this out, but if you purchased one of these used, do make sure there's no rips or cuts in there, especially before you look through it at the sun. And it has this little guy here. I don't see any reason to take that off. Now, it does not come with a finder scope. This is optimized and designed only for solar observation, so you can't see anything other than the sun through it, but it has a little hole and a white card here, so you can adjust this, and when the dot of the sun hits that crosshair, you know this guy is lined up at the sun. Has a focuser here. It's all plastic construction. I hear a little bit of grease on it, and there is a little bit of grease in here, so don't touch that rack and pinion gear. Don't touch the rack of the pinion gear if you don't want grease on your fingers. And it has dual security plugs here, so it's a little better than just a single one, but it's basically all plastic. It's an all plastic telescope. So we will assemble this. I have not looked at the instructions, but I'm going to make some assumptions that it works like any other telescope. We have a star diagonal, or maybe it's an upright diagonal. I'll have to check that out and see. It doesn't really matter for solar observation. I suspect they went with the cheapest thing they could use. And then a 20mm eyepiece. That were set up. It does have a vixen mount here, so you could put this thing on anything that takes a vixen mount, and it has the 1/4x20 plug there. This mount, it's a plastic vixen mount, but you could attach that to something. You could attach it to your main telescope as a finder scope, for example, even. But basically, it has a little vixen mount, dovetail, and a 1/4x20 socket there. All right, so this is the tripod you get with it. It's an SvBony SV510, so you could potentially find this tripod on sale somewhere else. It's at this price point, it's kind of what you'd expect. It's aluminum tubes, plastic connectors. If you find it at a garage sale, you're probably going to want to check every single one of these leg extensions, make sure there's not any cracks in them or anything like that. It's very lightweight, but then again, the telescope itself is also very lightweight. And all it has at the top here is your 1/4 by 20. There's no quick release plate. So you're going to have to hold this up and screw it on. There's a decent amount of surface area on that vixen dovetail and the rubber plate here, so it's going to stay on that plate pretty well. Once you get it on, you can set it upright. You can lift this guy up to that high there, so it's decent height even with a 6-foot person like me. You know, it's not fancy, but it will hold this lightweight optical tube in place, so you get it pointed at the sun, you lock it down, you can look through it for a while until you have to track the sun a little more. So this finder scope is attached with 2 screws, but they're basically 2 nuts on posts. And there's a little piece of rubber behind each of these, and this guy can rotate back and forth. It can, you know, twist, it can go up and down a little bit. So I think you could sight in the finder scope a little better if you had somebody helping you saying, yes, it's pointing right at the sun right now, and then you tighten it up when you get it exactly where you want it. So I think from the factory it probably comes semi-calibrated, and if you had an artificial sun source, you might be able to calibrate it at home as well, maybe a super high intensity halogen light bulb or something where you could fix this at that and then play with the shadow. The sun would work, the only problem is the sun moves through the sky. Let's see if it has from the factory enough accuracy here. So you can see when you get the shadow of the disc lined up, there's the tiny little dot. You put the dot in the center, and then you look through the eyepiece to see if you can see anything. I'm going to verify that, yes, my silver foil looks good. So I verified that the silver foil doesn't have any holes or scratches in it. So it should be safe to look through. All right, getting it focused worked pretty well. I have a pretty clear view of the sun. All right, this solar filtering film is definitely strong enough. When that sun goes behind the hazy clouds up there, it's just completely gone. So you need a direct sight to the sun. You know, it's definitely protecting your eyes appropriately, but if there are clouds in front of the sun, you're probably not going to see it through the eyepiece. So on this particular one, I get the best view of the sun, not when the dot is right in the center, but when it's just slightly off like that. So I think on yours, you're going to find that there'll be one spot where this thing will fit in the eyepiece pretty well. So with this 20mm eyepiece, the sun fills about 1/3 of it. So you have a little bit of room to track and find it as you're moving around, but when you get it centered, it pretty much is taking up most of the center of your view. I'm going to get my camera out here, see if I can take a picture of what you're seeing through this. I was not able to achieve focus with my camera into the diagonal, so I had to put the camera directly into the end of the focuser, and then I pulled it almost all the way out, and I could achieve focus with that. So I did this mostly so you could see what I saw through the eyepiece, not so much as a serious astrophotography effort here. You know, if you have the equipment to hook your camera up to something like this, you probably already have a telescope. And in general, if you already have a decent telescope, my recommendation is probably put your money into a solar filter for the end of your decent telescope. But this guy has uses. Super lightweight, super easy to carry outside and set up and just take a brief peek at the sun to, you know, say, hey, do I want to get my big rig out to, you know, is there anything interesting on the sun? Of course, you can do that online too. But it's also great for outreach, students, kids, let somebody else play with looking through this while you're working on your big rig. So at the $60 price point, I'm reasonably okay having purchased this. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it after the Eclipse or not, but that's mostly because I have several other smart telescopes that I have solar filters for that I'll probably use instead. If I did not have a solar filter for my telescope, you know, this makes a nice little add-on just to say, hey, let's go look at the sun in the daytime. So I think the most annoying thing about using this guy is the little tiny toy tripod. It has some advantages in that it can get this thing vertical, which is important if the sun is directly above you at high noon. But it's super lightweight, it wiggles around. It can support the weight of this guy and hold it in place, but it doesn't like move super smoothly. And so if you have a nice tripod and a nice fluid head that you can get to the right angle, so you may not be able to get something like this perfectly vertical, but if you have a fluid head that you can adjust where you can just point this thing and it'll keep the location, if you tighten this thing down enough so that you can move it but it'll hold on to where it is, using this optical tube is a real nice experience. With it up a little bit higher for me because I'm tall. If you have kids, it's not as big of an issue. But just having the fluid head that'll hold it very steady when you're not moving it, and yet allows it to be easily moved to track the sun as it moves through the sky. So, biggest upgrade here is if you can find a better tripod and fluid head that'll work well with it, definitely upgrade the tripod is my advice. And of course it does have that plastic vixen dovetail there, so if you have an extra tracking mount or extra telescope mount, you can just use it on that. On the end of this aluminum tube, there's basically 3 little tiny machine screws that go in there, and that holds this plastic container on, and that has the main lens, and it has this kind of mylarized film, the solar filter film. And that film, when I squeeze it, you can hear it go. So it does look like if you wanted to remove that film, this thing here is going to have to unscrew. And when I start to unscrew it, the film starts to bend, so I'm not going to put pressure on that because I'm worried the film might rip. And if you were to remove the film from this telescope, for the love of God, please remove the solar finder scope as well. And that way somebody looking at it won't assume it's a solar dedicated telescope. But it looks like there's one lens in here, maybe a lens in your eyepiece, and that's kind of what you're looking at here. So I don't think there's a good reason to remove the solar filter because I don't think it's going to be a super great telescope without it. So I took this guy outside, I focused it, and I'm just going to take a little black Sharpie and draw a line right here on this movable focuser tube for that 20mm eyepiece. So if you're using a different eyepiece, you might have to find a different line for that. But this way it'll get me very close. Then I can fine tune when I'm looking through it. But just to aid setup, and once you know what the focusing distance is, it's might as well mark it. Now if you're in astronomy and you have a better than this 20mm K eyepiece, you can certainly swap in other eyepieces that are standard 1.25. So just a little annoyance with the backpack is that these straps that hold the tripod and the optical tube in place, the Velcro is only like 1.5 inches long, and if you want to tighten it up, the Velcro doesn't touch itself. So you can put the Velcro on, but it's still very loose in there. Now they do have a divider between the two that's a tiny little nylon divider between the two. But it is a nice, easy to store, easy to carry package. So my summary here is, yes, I think it's worth $60, but not much more than that. It's a nice, inexpensive package if you're looking to observe the sun. I can see it being useful for the solar eclipse, but I expect there's going to be a lot of these on the used market as soon as the eclipse is over.